lights down. Turn the lights down and just put this on. It's right behind you. Johan.
There's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? We are going to occupy land. South Africa occupy land. That's who we are. Can we drop my membership from this useless parliament?
Yes, honorable member.
Must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because the killing is part of a revolutionary act. Shoot to kill the mother, kill the poor, the farmer, kill the poor, the farmer.
The man of D-Day in PE is a white man. So these people, when you want to hit them hard, go after a white man. They feel a terrible pain because they've turned a white man.
Do you think Afrikaner farmers are the most persecuted group in the world?
I think those 49 people that came certainly felt they were persecuted, and they've passed every sort of check mark that had to be checked off in terms of meeting the requirements for that. They live in a country where farms are taken and land is taken on a racial basis.
Okay. Do you think they're more persecuted than Uyghurs or Rohingyas, or more persecuted than political dissidents in Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua, or more persecuted than those who would be threatened should they be returned to Afghanistan by violence by the Taliban?
Well, the problem we face there is the volume problem, okay? If you look at all the persecuted people of the world, it's millions of people. They can't all come here. And we had refugee programs.
So why prioritize Afrikaner farmers?
Well, because it's a small subset, it's a new issue, and the president identified it as a problem and wanted to use it as an example. But that's different from having these refugee programs that were basically spending money to put people up in communities and accommodate them, and it was acting as a magnet. Millions of people in this country illegally, and today the border is sealed.
Let me challenge you, and I'm just going to say for the public, if you want to understand about the, quote, persecution of Afrikaner farmers, go look at the composition of the South African government. Since July of 2024, there's a government of national unity, and the opposition party to the ANC, the Afrikaner Party, the Democracy Alliance, is part of the governing coalition. They joined the governing coalition a year ago, and the leader of that party was given the remit of Agriculture Minister, John Steenhuisen. He is the leader of the former Afrikaner Party, still widely representing Afrikaners. He is the Minister of Agriculture in South Africa right now. I assert that this claim that there's persecution of Afrikaner farmers is completely specious. Are you aware ever during the apartheid era in South Africa did the United States establish a special program to allow South African blacks who were treated as second-class citizens in the apartheid program, a special program that they could claim refugee status in the United States?
No, because I was probably in 9th grade or 8th grade at the time.
Yeah, well, then I don't expect you to know. I'll just tell you, never has there been a program, a special program for Africans to come in as refugees to the United States. We've allowed special programs for people being persecuted for their religion, Soviet-era Jews. We've allowed special programs for people fleeing from communism, Cuba, Vietnam, the Soviet Union. We've never allowed a special program to allow Africans into the United States in an expedited refugee status until now. Afrikaner farmers living in a nation governed by a government of national unity that includes the main Afrikaner Party.
Among many of these types of American whites is not pride for being white. It's unadulterated hatred for everyone else. And this is not speculative. There is evidence And these folks, as they speak, they're sitting on the bones of the Native Americans who were murdered. And there was never any criminal case. There was never any apology. In fact, oppositely, they made a holiday and called it Thanksgiving and acted like it was all good. They're standing on the bones of what is mass murder, and it occurred on a racial basis. Many of these people have not changed at all. It's not about being pro-white. It's about being anti everything else. And that is the problem with these people, is that they are, in fact, devils on earth. We never had a problem with you being pro-white. And when they try to flip the script and call black people black supremacists, you cannot give a single instance in the history of the United States where you have any group of black people who committed organized violence against whites merely because they're white. I'll repeat that. Any group of black people, an organization of black people who committed organized violence against whites merely because they're white. Black people don't have it in them. I've many times described black people as an effeminate mass. Conversely, you can describe the neo-Nazis, you can describe the Ku Klux Klan, you can describe the whole industry that was around transatlantic enslavement, and the dead bodies hanging from the trees have even been immortalized in songs like Strange.
All right, Shalom. There's a brother Nahalia from the GMS Orlando camp. I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yashar Allah. And a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word, in all truth and in sincerity. This is Job chapter 20 and verse 4. Knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment? Though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reach unto the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, where is he? All right, and we're watching, all right, those two clips that you just saw through the spirit is an example of the joy of the hypocrite, all right, because the so-called white man is a hypocrite. His rulership is an example of hypocrisy. All right, you saw, and this is the government, right? The government, these are politicians who should be more versed in global affairs than the average American. All right, and I want to go to Chat GPT also, all right, because again, you could pull a lot of things out of Chat GPT, all right, that speak to information, you know, that supports what's going on through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shemel Shai, because we're in a time of prophecy. All right, when you deal with the rulership of Esau Edom, the scriptures describe him as the basis of men. All right, Esau Edom being a so-called white man. All right, it describes him as the wicked, being estranged from the womb. All right, they go about as soon as they be born speaking lies. All right, and this is an example of a lie. He basically called out the South African president for something that they're not guilty of. All right, to try to rouse his own base, which is the average Joe Six-Pack Edomite in America, the average so-called white man in America. He basically did that to push this narrative of the so-called white man being a victim. All right, historically speaking, the so-called white man always used false pretenses to justify attempted genocide and basically crimes against humanity. All right, Tulsa, Oklahoma was an example of the so-called white man destroying a so-called black city, area, successful, prominent, prosperous area based on a lie. No judicial evidence, all hearsay, but it was enough to rouse the so-called white man's hatred for you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. All right. This is Psalm chapter 58 and verse 3. It says, the wicked are estranged from the womb. They go astray as soon as they be born, speaking lies. Their poison is like the poison of a serpent. They are like the deaf adder that stoppeth her ear. All right. So we're witnessing this in real time. All right. I had a lesson yesterday through the spirit on the hypocrisy. All right. That was called out by the president or leader, if you want to call him. I wouldn't call him a president. He's a leader of Burkina Faso. All right. And him pointing out the hypocrisy. All right. And we're seeing it again. The so-called white man is using propaganda. All right. To basically justify wickedness. All right, because they're going to come down with great wrath. And how is the so-called white man going to justify it? By playing the victim. All right, this is his MO. Now, there is no real genocide going on in South Africa. That is false. That's the furthest thing from the truth. All right. Matter of fact, this is a perfect time to go to Chat GPT. All right. And I'm doing this on the screen record so we can see it. All right. Is there a white genocide in South Africa? Question mark. And plain and simple, no, there is no evidence of a white genocide occurring in South Africa. And the reason I call the so-called white man a hypocrite in this video is because while you have real Palestinians dying, all right, being supported, the state of Israel is being supported by the so-called white man in America. The bombs that they're dropping on the Palestinians are basically funded or are actually from the defense contractors in America. They're either funding the weapons, all right, or just outright giving them weapons. And they're funding an attempted genocide. All right. The so-called Palestinians don't have nearly half the technology. All right. And they're up against the state of Israel, which is funded and supported by the so-called white man in America. But he'll ignore that. All right. The scriptures talk about the death adder. He'll ignore that to justify saying that the South African so-called white man in South Africa is one of the most persecuted groups on the planet. Furthest thing from the truth. And that whole thing that he did with the South African president was a full-on propaganda. Full-on propaganda. And it was to ignite his base. All right. The average so-called white man in America who really don't know shit. Really just a pawn on the chessboard. But they pull on these strings to justify these type of things, man. And the world is waking up to the lies of the so-called white man. All right, particularly the lies of the so-called white man in the West. And this is an example. All right. Now I'm going to go here. I'm going to read a little bit more of this. It says, this term has been used in political and media circles, particularly outside South Africa, to describe attacks on white South Africans, especially farmers. However, multiple investigations, including those by independent researchers, human rights groups, and the South African government, have found no basis for labeling the situation as genocide. Come on, man. This is plain. All right. And what you saw in the exchange with Marco Rubio and the other politician, I don't know his name off the top of my head, but he was basically pointing out these same facts, that there's no actual genocide going on in South Africa. All right, there's no actual genocide going on. This is propaganda to make the so-called white man in America feel like he's a victim, which is ultimately going to justify him coming down with great wrath. See, there's a battle going on between the rich so-called white man and the poor and so-called middle class white man, because really it's only the rich and poor. There's a battle going on between those two. And what's happening really is the rich so-called white man is sending off the poor so-called white man by convincing him that other nationalities and other races of people are responsible for him losing his position. And in actuality, his own people are stealing from him and blaming other groups. Let's go here. And Salakia for not grabbing the scriptures soon enough. All right, this is Ecclesiastes 14:5. It says, he that is evil to himself. Matter of fact, I'm going to start at 4. It said, no, I got to start up. I'm going to start at 3. Riches are not comely for a niggard. And what should an envious man do with money? He that gathereth by defrauding his own soul gathereth for others that shall spend his goods riotously. He that is evil to himself, to whom will he be good? He shall not take pleasure in his goods. There is none worse than he that envieth himself, and this is a recompense of his wickedness. Now, this is beautiful, right? Because it says that he that is evil to himself, to whom will he be good? Or if the so-called white man is basically defrauding his own people, we don't have a shot. As a nation of people, we don't have a shot of the so-called white man ever showing you compassion if he's willing to rob and steal from his own people? And that's actually what's happening. All right. Matter of fact, let's go here. Let's get Lyndon B. Johnson and a quote. I want to get this quote. Yeah. It says, all right, this is a quote from Lyndon B. Johnson. All right, the president after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And it says, the quote you're referring to is often attributed to Lyndon B. Johnson and goes something like this. What this country needs is a good 5-cent cigar. If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. And this is what's happening on a global stage. Well, I'll say this is happening in Babylon the Great, which is America. All right, for sure. That's what's happening here. All right. You could say it's happening in Europe as well, but it's really happening here. Because what you're seeing through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shah is a defrauding of the average so-called white person by their own people. And they're convincing the average so-called white person that it's diversity, equity, and inclusion is the problem. Critical race theory is the problem. They're giving them these false narratives that this is to blame while robbing them. Because if you look at the household income of the average so-called Negro, Latino, and Native American, it hasn't changed much. So where's that wealth actually going? It's going to the rich of the so-called white man. Now, on average, the so-called white man is far richer than you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. But they're noticing that they're losing position and they're losing wealth in a country they believe belongs to them. And what a guy like Trump has done is he's convinced the average so-called white man that it's not the rich of their own people to blame. It's you Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, and every other immigrant that don't look like them. Because ICE is not looking for these Europeans that don't have visas, whose visas expired. They're not looking for them. Yeah, and you notice this. They're only targeting these so-called Hispanics and you can even throw Native Americans in there. And the Southern Kingdom as well. You know, there's rumors of them trying to snatch up Levi. All right, so all of this is going back to the hypocrisy of the so-called white man, painting himself out to be a victim to justify wicked oppression. All right. Now, let me read a little bit more of this. All right, so just to be transparent, it says, however, it's important to note that there's no solid historical evidence that Johnson actually said or wrote this. It appears to be more of an apocryphal or paraphrased quote, summarizing a broader political and social tactic used by many politicians in the American South during the Jim Crow era. All right, so there's no solid evidence to say that he actually said this. So all of it is really hearsay. But what you see is policy that is supported by this quote. So the so-called white man's policy, especially the Republicans, is to appeal to the average so-called white man that it's not the rich of his own people that's robbing him. It's the immigrants. It's the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans that are taking up all of this welfare and it's causing you to pay taxes to things that don't help you. Those are all false narratives that the so-called white man pushes to rob his own people. All right. And going back to the topic of this lesson, the whole conversation with the white Afrikaners being persecuted is another push toward this narrative, because it makes the average so-called white man in America believe that they're actually being persecuted. And they're not. They're being called out for sure through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shai. And that goes back to prophecy. All right, the Lord said that he would call them out and truth would run over the so-called white man. See, when the truth comes out, it completely condemns him. He has no leg to stand on when the actual truth of the scriptures come out. They could run with these narratives of being a free, open society, a democratic society, and they civilize the natives, but nobody believes that narrative anymore. All right, and that goes back to prophecy. All right, this is 2 Esdras 6:27. For evil shall be put out, and deceit shall be quenched. As for faith, it shall flourish. Corruption shall be overcome, and the truth which hath been so long without fruit shall be declared. And that's exactly what's happening. And what the so-called white man is doing is trying to save face. All right, this is why critical race theory is an attempt to cover up his own shame. All right, what he once gloried in has now become a shame unto him. All right, this is Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 10. It says, thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and hast sinned against thy soul. And this is why you had a so-called white man on social media talking about we're tired of having the so-called white guilt when people are just telling the truth. The problem is that the truth condemns the so-called white man. All right, especially when you deal with the truth of the Bible. When you deal with his actual biblical nationality. All right, that's when he really gets exposed. And that's why he's going to have to come down with great wrath, because he realizes that this truth is condemning him, man. All right, this is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 8. It says, and then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. And how's the Lord doing that? He's using the prophets, man. All right, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shah, the Lord is using the prophets to bring these things out. And the truth which hath been so long without fruit is now being declared through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shah. And the hypocrisy of the so-called white man is being exposed, even by his own people. And they don't even realize what they're doing. They think that they're speaking against the corrupt people in their own government, but really they're being used for prophecy. All right. And I'm going to bring this out. This is Psalms chapter 64 and verse 8. So they shall make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. All that see them shall flee away. Because when you really deal with all the crimes of the so-called white man and how it relates to the Bible, you find out that his biblical nationality is Esau Edom. And everything he's doing in the earth reveals who his biblical nationality is. You have some Israelites who are still saying that Esau is the so-called Arabs. And that's not the case when you look at the world we live in. The so-called Arabs are not ruling with the sword. They're not living by the sword. And that goes back to the blessing that Isaac gave Esau, that he would live by the sword. All right, this is Genesis 27. And I'm going to just get to the point. All right, and it says Genesis 27 and 39. I'll start at 38. And Esau said unto his father, hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. And by thy sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing wherewith his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand. Then will I slay my brother Jacob. But the point is that Isaac told Esau that he would have a dominion, meaning he would have a point of rulership, but he would live by the sword. All right, he would have to maintain his dominion through violence. And this is why the top military on the planet, there's no coincidence that it's the so-called white man. It's no coincidence that the so-called white man, his only gift to society, if you will, is his ability to kill efficiently. That's not what the so-called Arabs are known for. Every war they fought have been with hand-me-down weapons from the so-called white man. They didn't come up with nukes. And this is the so-called white man's MO, painting himself out to be the victim while committing all acts of atrocities across the planet, overtly and covertly. And people are starting to see right through this bullshit. Now, the average so-called white man ate that shit up when they saw Trump bring out the video and make the South African president watch the video of Malema, all right, which is the politician in South Africa, basically doing a chant about kill the Boer, which is basically killing the white farmer. And it's a song, but it's almost like a song of endearment. It's like I don't know how to explain it, but it's like kind of like how the Star Spangled Banner is to America. It's one of those type of songs for them. All right. So he brought that out. But when you look at the ground, all right, the evidence for a white genocide is non-existent. But this is what the so-called white man is good at. He's blessed with the sword, whether it's the sword, the physical sword, or the sword of the tongue. All right. But it's no longer working like it used to. And this is why he's going to have to resort to his first gift. All right. Which is the sword of the physical sword. All right. Matter of fact, let me go here. This is Psalms 37. I believe it's 37. Bear with me. Salakia, I'm looking for something in particular. This is Proverbs 26 and 24. You know what? I'll start at 22. It says, the words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts of the belly. Burning lips and a wicked heart are like a potsherd covered with silver dross. He that hateth dissembleth with his lips, and layeth up deceit within him. When he speaketh fair, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart, whose hatred is covered by deceit. And this has been his MO. Think about this. All right. Whose hatred is covered by deceit. His wickedness shall be showed before the whole congregation. Whoso diggeth a pit shall fall therein, and he that rolleth a stone, it will return upon him. A lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it, and a flattering mouth worketh ruin. All right. This is evidence that the scriptures point to the so-called white man being the wicked. As a nation of people, this is how they've conducted themselves on the planet. Here it is. They've lied about history. And then they hate you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans for being the example of how everything that they've said about America is a lie. Freedom and equality for all men. And the world is literally watching how you actually operate. And it goes back to the hatred Esau had for Jacob. The scriptures describe it as a perpetual hatred. And his hatred is covered by deceit. This is why he's using this. The white Afrikaners are being persecuted. See, they're trying to kill us. That's what the so-called white man is basically rousing up his neighbors to believe. That it's Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and then other nations of people that are persecuting them and trying to kill them. To do what? To justify their hatred. To justify them coming down with great wrath. Because that's exactly what the so-called white man is about to do. He's being robbed by his own people. He's frustrated. He doesn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And when a so-called white man is desperate and starving, they become extremely violent criminals. Despite what they say about Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. You don't have a full-on list of serial killers that's Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. You don't have a big ass list of so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans shooting up schools and movie theaters. No, you have desperate, destitute so-called white men doing that. And this goes back to who they are. All right. The violent man, the son of perdition, as a nation of people. All right. The scriptures call him the territory of wickedness. And how do they try to justify it? By painting themselves out to be the victim. like Trump tried to do to the South African president. All right, this is Malachi 1:4. It says, whereas Edom saith, we are impoverished, but we will return and build the desolate places. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, they shall build, but I will throw down, and they shall call them the border of wickedness, and the people against whom the Lord hath indignation forever. All right. This is the people that the Lord hath indignation forever. And look at why. They lie, they steal, they try to justify their crimes through deception. We're not just talking about the so-called American white man. If you put all of their crimes in one pot, this is the son of perdition. This is the border of wickedness everywhere they go. This is why the scriptures say that they shall not possess the land nor fill the face of the world with cities, because wherever they go, wickedness follows. And they try to justify by putting a bunch of glittery words like democracy on top of it to cover up the fact that it's all wicked and it's criminal activity. You know, one of the greatest lies the so-called white man has been able to successfully do on the planet is to convince the world that so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans are inherent criminals while being the inherent criminal. We don't have a reputation of destroying nations of people, of going in somebody's land and robbing and raping their land. We don't have a reputation for that. You can say Jake destroy their own neighborhoods and they kill each other, but you can't say that we went over to India and invaded India, or we tried to get the so-called Chinese or Japanese hooked on drugs with opium wars. That ain't our reputation as a nation of people. But as the scriptures say, Satan would be loose for a little season to deceive the nations. Didn't say that he would try, he would do it. But guess what? We just read in 2nd Esdras the 6th chapter earlier that truth, which has been so long without fruit, is being declared. And a part of the truth being declared is it shines a light on who the wicked actually is. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying. With that, I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasher Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity.